Hello, welcome. Francis here. Thank you for coming back to my channel. If this is your first time here, I bid thee welcome. There is a subscribe button below if you would like to support this channel by subscribing, and also a bell to be notified as to when I upload more content. I'm coming to you from Ghana country, and as such, I acknowledge the Ghana people of the Adelaide Plains as being the traditional custodians of this land. So this video, I'm going to put my head on a chopping block, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this witch wound thing. And there is a whole range of differing opinions about it. Mostly, yeah, I'm just going to sort of like talk a little bit why I feel uncomfortable with how it's been depicted. I'm not saying that I don't believe in the essence of what they're talking about. They, as in particular, Celeste Larson, and who wrote a book called Heal the Witch Wound, Reclaim Your Magic and Step into Your Power. I think that came out in 2023, maybe a little bit earlier. It has been in our consciousness for a little while. But how it's being marketed, that's what I have a problem with. Yeah, I'm sort of jumping ahead of myself. So I'm sort of unpack a little bit as to the witch wound and what it's about, why I don't like how it's being marketed at, but what it can actually relate to in all of it. Now, let's start off with Celeste Larson's book, which sort of asks questions and is directed more at women than men, which is probably why I first have a few issues with it, in that it sort of, it asks women in particular, do you feel sort of unsafe speaking your truth? Or do you feel threatened if you sort of present yourself as to who you are? Do other people find that threatening? And do you sort of like dim your own light and shrink from being you, hide your gifts, anything that you makes you stand out? Do you find that sort of intimidating, threatening? Do you sort of like don't be you and draw attention to yourself and instead sort of play the game so much? And if you say yes to these questions and more, you could be carrying around what she calls the witch wound. And a lot of people have been talking about this witch wound and said it's not a new idea, but I think Celeste was one of the first people to put it into a book form. And basically, it's looking at sort of a suppression of women, and in a way why we don't sort of step into our truth and be vocal and be out there is due because of the witch burning times, the witch trials of the 17th, 16th, 15th century. And we're carrying forth some sort of intergenerational trauma or some trauma in our DNA because we are females, and this is why we don't do that. Now, I have an interest in what's termed as witch wound. I have an interest in intergenerational trauma. I have an interest in what makes us do things. I'm not a psychologist in any way, shape, or form, but even through my Dark Goddess book, I use myth and sacred symbolism as ways of sort of unpacking stuff about us. Why do we do things in this current existence? Sort of led me down the road of neuro-linguistic programming, which again sort of like taps into what they call timelines and things that we carry on, especially energetically or emotionally, from experiences in our past. And it can be distant past, not just this incarnation, it can be past lives. Intergenerational trauma is something that's increasingly being recognized within psychology fields, in that the end result, why we don't do things, could actually be passed down to us through actions or instances that our ancestors, probably in more recent times, have had to do to survive. More recent times, so if we went through, if we had relatives who went through, say, the wars, if there were food shortages or the Depression in particular, say in the 20s or 30s when there was the global depression, and they had to sort of hoard food for survival, so they had enough food, that could result in us to do subconsciously hoarding food, opening up our cupboard, and we've got so much food there, but we keep buying more. It can sort of like explain why we do these impulsive things. And that's just in more recent memory as well. So when it comes to witch wound, I have at first sort of brushed it off as a marketing ploy, especially how it's been picked up by influencers, and sort of pop psychology with people who don't really have any background in psychology, or stating their claims on assumption as opposed to truth. This is just my head where I am at. I haven't actually read Celeste Larson's book, so I don't know how she has packaged this, but from what I have read of it and reviews and things like that, it tends to be pitched largely at women, or almost as a reasoning or a justification that we collectively hold this intergenerational sort of psychic wounding that has scarred us for centuries. Now, whether that's part of the patriarchal society that we've been living in for 3,000 years or not, it's saying that basically the reason why women are sort of hesitant of sort of like being out in the spotlight is because we are witch wounded. And she based her truth on the historical witch hunts, the burning times, where tens of thousands of innocent people were accused of practicing witchcraft or malicious magic and were executed largely in rather inhumane ways. We're still seeing that happening today in certain parts of the world, though we just sort of turn our blind eye to it. And majority of these were women. Now, why I don't sort of accept this generalization is not saying it doesn't exist, is that my understanding of incarnation is that we can incarnate in multiple genders. So if we were a female during the burning times, which spanned over a number of centuries, really, and well, my thoughts are getting ahead of me. So we could incarnate, and even in this lifetime, incarnate as a man. We can or could also have incarnated from being an accuser, not just the victim. Also, my exploration into the burning times, the witch burnings, the witch trials, how all that started, because I'm sort of curious as to why things like that happened. It didn't start with it being against women. It actually started with Christianity having the spear of Jews. And it was the Jews who were first accused of poisoning wells. And I think the earliest claim back in the 12th century, if not earlier, it was the Jews. It was only from the, I think, 16th century, maybe 15th century, that women started to play a key role into it. And really, it wasn't until the press was invented and the Bible or the Malleus Maleficarum came to print, and I don't have those details as to where it was, that this claim against women, this fixation against women, women being in league with the devil, sort of took hold. But even then, there were still men being accused of witchcraft. And also, not all of the accusers were men. There were women who were accusing women. A lot of that was accused out of mob mentality, out of jealousy. You caught the eye of somebody and you turned down their advances, and next minute you were a witch. They wanted your property because you were a widow and you didn't have any male to look after you. You were a witch, you could get your property. They could get your property. Usually the church got your property. But men were also accused as well. So this is what one of the thorn in my sides when people start talking about the witch wound and how it was patriarchy against women. It's like, no, it's not all of that. So there are other sides of the story when it comes to the witch wound. And I think one of the cases in Salem in Massachusetts in the US, Giles, there's a memorial in Salem where a lot of the women did lose their lives, but one of the guys there lost his life, and he was basically compacted by stones. And that's how he died. So that was brutal in itself. So coming back, yes, I believe in intergenerational trauma. Now you can call it legacy trauma. There's lots of words these days, but basically it's the same thing. And this is, as I said, trauma that's been passed down through our bodies, through our DNA. And as a result, today it manifests often in a rather different way to how it was originally experienced, often in actions and behaviors that we take on subconsciously without even realizing that we are doing these things, yet there are always clues. And there is a Native American psychologist, June Lyle, I think, Dr. June Lyle. I think that's her name. She made mention in a talk a number of years ago that it was a conference where she was talking about the difference between, say, Caucasian, Western society and culture and Indigenous cultures. For Indigenous cultures, their colonialization, the pain that they are experiencing, or the intergenerational wounding that they are experiencing, and some of it's not intergenerational wounding at all, is recent from Western colonialism in the last 200, 300 years. So it's very recent. For us in the West, or for us sort of Caucasian people who ancestral has come from Europe, the Western world, our wounding, like our Indigenous wounding, is centuries, millennia old, to the extent that, and I think she was talking about stress levels as well. We operate on a higher level of stress because we are just so used to it, because we have all this intergenerational trauma that is not only a few generations compared to Indigenous peoples, it is millennia of generations that we have not dealt with, that we have not been acknowledged, that has filtered through into our perceptions, into our psychology, into our mindsets, into our body, into our DNA, as now depicted as normal. So we all get triggered about things, but how we operate, how we handle these, usually not very well. Again, this is now because it's like we've always been doing it. It's perceived as normal, yet it's not normal. So when we're looking at something like the witch wound, the premise of it, yes, I agree with. It's part of the intergenerational trauma that I'd say a lot of us, I wouldn't say all of us, but a lot of us carry within our DNA, including men. So it's not gender specific. I think it's when they come down to specific size, is that a word? It just being for women, my alarm bells go off as that's a marketing ploy. That is tapping into that subconscious marketing ploy that us women are inadequate. And I'm really putting myself out there because we're all now wounded. We all now have an excuse as to why we don't do things. But in order for us to be whole, because we're not apparently whole, we have to do this course or buy this book or etc., etc. That's where it sort of starts losing its grounding with me. When it comes to intergenerational trauma, and it's interesting because this feeds into another area of psychology. I think it's psychology. There's a doctor, I think he's a medical doctor, maybe not a psychologist, but he's written a book, and that's on my bedside table, and I can't remember its name, but it's The Body Keeps the Score or something like that. It's like we hold things in our physical body. And if you go to a masseuse or not necessarily a chiropractor, but a physiotherapist, they can tell you where you have stored stress, pain. And this could be from old injuries, knots in our neck, often from stress, things that we haven't worked through, but our body holds on to it. And when you go to, especially with sports massage or a proper masseuse, where they actually release all those knots and you feel so much better, then afterwards you could feel emotionally shitty because all of the pent up emotions our body has been holding is now being released and it has to go somewhere. And this is the same on a psychological level. It's just like when it comes to really deep emotions like trauma and grief in particular. In the West, we really suck as knowing how to handle these. We also don't allow people to express these emotions because we feel uncomfortable. We don't have the right tools to handle people who are going through such emotions. We're also in a society where your 5 minutes is up, grieving is over. Come on, get your shit together. Time to move on. And then we tend to, if our needs are not met, we go externally instead of internally, because then we're told that we can't do it ourselves. Then we can live in the past. And I see that playing out on all angles as well. And I see myself get caught up in that cycle. And sometimes that's just human. That's just who we are, where we're at. And this is why, for me in particular, when I work with, say, myth, part of these stories is to connect in with those deities and their stories, and then allow those stories or emotions that you're beginning to feel to rise up, begin to sort of like allow your body to do its thing. And sometimes it's through that grief, that outlet of emotion, that can be such a release. And that's what you need. You don't need somebody to sort of give you a big hug. Sometimes you do. When I was learning NLP, that was one of the things we were told not to do when someone is, especially talking about their trauma or talking about their grief, and they start to become emotional. Don't hug them, because when you hug them, what you're actually doing is cementing that sensation, that emotion, and that experience back into their body. Yet we're in a society where it's encouraged to do that. So we're sort of like finding our ways around all these tricky ways of doing things. So coming back to witch wound, it is, I think, an interesting topic. It sort of has been sort of merged with the sort of toxic binds of patriarchy and capitalism and imperialism and even religious tyranny, the restricted self-expression. And again, these are things that are quite often directed towards women. And once again, it's seem to be on the rise again, especially in the US, but also in Australia and other places of the world, sort of a political discussion, especially around the rights of a woman's body. It's just like, yeah, this is my body. Yeah, I'm quite capable of looking after it myself. I don't need somebody else to tell me what I can and cannot do. But these oppressive systems dictate which lifestyles, which professions, hobbies, interests, bodies, clothes, hairstyles, how worthy we are. I'm of a certain age now where logarithms are coming up saying that women over a certain age should wear their hair this way, should wear these clothes, should wear makeup this way. According to who? I recently made a comment on someone's post about the charity collectors that you see in the street. I get annoyed when they sort of single me out because I'm a woman. Obviously, in their mind or their training, it's because I'm female. I'm more gullible to, or more likely to donate to waste my time with their banter than a male colleague or who I'm walking with. I get singled out. Now that's a form of gender biasness there. But again, I'm getting off track. So the witch burnings, the witch craze of the Middle Ages. Yes, it was a dark period in history. History's had a lot of dark periods. We're going through a dark period in current history. It sort of ended allegedly with Salem in the US, but it still continues today, and the witch hunts still continue. And a lot of this today is largely due to colonization and Christianity. Not necessarily fundamentalist Christianity, but we see this in sort of Western African countries, Ghana, Kenya, Tanzania. I don't think that's a West, but there are still people being accused of witchcraft or sorcery, like more witchcraft, and it's a sort of a Western colonialistic perspective of witchcraft as opposed to sort of more indigenous teachings or practices that they are doing. Some of these people are still losing their lives. But when they talk about the witch wound, they're sort of talking about what happened in Europe largely, or in the US. As I said, yes, the majority who lost their lives, and I think the figures are around about 50,000 to 100,000 people, not the 3 million that we all once believed. And this is across this period of time from the mid 1500s to the mid 1600s. Twice as many people were actually imprisoned and tortured and even exiled. Not everyone who was accused of witchcraft, in fact, the majority of those accused of witchcraft actually were not witches. They were women who had sexual relationships with other people while they were unmarried. They received or performed abortions. They wielded too much power. In fact, about 80% of people who were executed were women, were unmarried women, and were actually over the age of 40. 40% lived in modern-day Germany, 75% in what were German-speaking lands at the time. Many were actually burnt alive. Some were beheaded, or hung, or drowned. English witches, or those accused of witchcraft in England, were hung or drowned. There's the ducking stool. Scotland, they were burnt. The Malus Maleficarum I did mention earlier, it sort of really influenced the witch hunts. But we are looking at, not all of Europe, but most of Europe, from Spain, Portugal, all the way through to Hungary and Poland. Even Scandinavia also had their own sort of witch trials. Not sure about Asia. We haven't heard anything about Asia as well. But as I said, how it's marketed today, this sort of the witch wound, um, it's very heavily directed at females. And is it all or only connected with the witch burnings? The fact that women are still suppressed. I don't personally believe that we can use it as the sole reasoning in a patriarchal society, which has been going on for 3,000 years, constantly undermining, whittling away the rights of women, the status of women, how women are perceived in society, to the state that we are today, where there is still perpetual violence, discrimination, and even fear directed at women. Why, I don't understand. But what I do find interesting in relation to the witch wound is this concept of intergenerational trauma. I do find that interesting. I do find looking at it that we all experience intergenerational trauma more important than trying to find, and I think that's what gets me about the witch wound, trying to find a blame. Trying to find a focal point when we live in a culture or society that for millennia has been building up. It didn't just happen or stem from events in the 16th, 17th century. It was long before then. And today it's not just towards women. Who have we been in the past? I mean, to say that I'm affected by the witch wound because I'm a woman in this incarnation and therefore I was burnt or drowned as a witch, I think is erroneous. Because who knows, during the witch burning times, I might have been part of the Inquisition. I might have been a man. Then does that mean that I have that sort of guilt carry through? I might have come from part of the world that didn't experience the burning times. As I mentioned earlier, but we can also pick up on sort of the collective energetics of the whole Western culture that has had generation upon generation upon generation of suppression. And what started the witch burning times was a time of unsettlement, political unrest with the collapsing of the feudal system, constant wars coming through. So I find it really interesting when people try and sort of point to one specific point in time and use that as the key triggering point. When, especially if we do sort of past lives and have the whole concept of reincarnation, how do we know? I mean, traumatic experiences are common. Most of us experience at least one event in our lifetime that can keep us coming back. I think of what's happening in the Middle East and think of the children and how impacted they are going to be when they reach even teenagehood. We're seeing that today, like here in the West, out of COVID, 5 years out from COVID, how that has impacted upon the youth as they are sort of moving through, or the youth moving into adulthood in a world where it's so driven now by fear, more so than, say, back when I was that age. And all that plays on our psyche, on our energetics. and we keep with our 24-hour news cycle, all of this feeds into that collective energy. And now we're adding on this concept of witch wound, which, again, I don't mean to dismiss it. I do think it is one of many traumas that especially us in the West have gone through. And by that, I'm not saying that if you are in this incarnation an Indigenous person that you may not have been a Western person at some other time. I don't know. Maybe you were. But I don't like how the witch wound personally is marketed at women. And again, the whole sort of self-help industry is primarily marketed at women. It gives an underlining subliminal message that this is another reason why we are flawed. And to me, that comes back full circle back to the patriarchal, capitalistic world that we live in. I think, yes, again, there is a thing called the witch wound. But when we look at the historical fact, and also if we take in the concept of incarnation, there's no guarantee, as I said, that I was, say, a woman who was wrongly accused and lost my life, or whatever during the witch burning times. I could have very easily have been part of the Inquisition, or I may not have even been in that vicinity at all. So does that mean that I don't have any issues, that I can't speak my truth or feel uncomfortable? People dance it in Australia, we call it the tall puppy syndrome. I've experienced that. But I think we're sort of going into, basically it's the same old, the sort of pop psychology, loosely based on historical truth. Make us feel good, almost like giving us an excuse. I find it interesting. And I know I have explored this previously, whether I've done a video on it or not. I think I have, but I don't think I've posted it. But I might revisit that and share some more thoughts on it when I've given a little bit more food for thought. So if this is an area that you're interested in, or maybe you've read Celeste's book, if there's exercise in it, you've worked through it, that it's done your thing, let me know. Feel free to put comments below. So this is just my opinion on it, because again, it's becoming popular once again. So yeah, thank you for listening. Blessings.